3.4, PEP 257 and Sphinx. We're going to see how to format our docstrings to get the most use from them, and we're going to look at the restructured text markup format. Then see how to feed those two things into the Sphinx documentation compiler, and to create HTML pages for our documentation of our project.
PEP 257 documents the expectations of Python programmers and tools with respect to docstrings. The basic rules are quite simple. Use triple quotes to delimit the docstring. The closing triple quotes should be on a line of their own, if the docstring is longer than one line. The first line should present a short description of the thing being documented, such as return and distance between points A and B. After the first line, we can either end the docstring, or insert a blank line followed by more in-depth documentation, containing descriptions of parameters, attributes, usage semantic, examples, and so on. The reason for this layout is that many tools show the first line as a pop-up, tooltip, or otherwise presented as a quick reference. The text after the blank line is presented when a detailed documentation is requested. The docstring processing tools are smart about indentation, so it's safe and encouraged to indent our docstrings so that they match up with the rest of the code block they're describing. Those basic rules are all that's required to make the docstrings interact well with Python's PyDoc and help tools, IDEs, and so on. But they don't give us any way of creating well-formatted standalone documentation. That's where Sphinx comes into play. Sphinx is a tool that can process Python source code in standalone documentation files and generate nicely formatted documentation in a number of formats, notably including HTML. Sphinx, like other Python documentation tools, recognizes a markup language called restructured text, which is intentionally readable and informative even when its markup is presented as plain text rather than being interpreted. Restructured text documents are still readable in a simple text editor, but when we feed them through a tool like Sphinx, they make the end result much richer. Restructured text syntax is based on the conventions that developed on the internet before actual rich text was widely available in email and real-time chat. So, for example, words are emphasized by putting an asterisk at each end, and emphasized further by making that into two asterisks. Paragraphs are marked by placing a blank line between them. There's syntax for lists, headings, and so on, plainly readable in text mode. The syntax is nicely described in the Python Developer's Guide on the Python website, but we're going to concentrate on a few bits of markup that do a lot to enhance the documentation of our modules and packages. We've actually already mentioned one of those bits of markup. When our docstrings make reference to a local variable such as a function parameter, that reference should be enclosed in asterisks to emphasize it and make it distinct from the normal text of the documentation. The names of modules, classes, functions, methods, attributes, exceptions, global variables, and constants should all be marked properly so that Sphinx can cross-reference them and create links to their documentation. All of these object types share a similar syntax, which is that we put a type-identifying keyword between colons, immediately followed by the name of the object in back quotes, as you can see in this example. That's enough restructured text syntax to make a big difference in the quality of our documentation, so we're going to leave it there and move on to talking about how to actually use the Sphinx tool. If it's not already installed, we can install it using pip. Sphinx can do a lot, so it's worth looking through the tutorial on this sphinx-doc.org. It's quite nice. For our own purposes, though, all we're interested in is turning docstrings into HTML, so we'll work through that process here. The first step is to start a command line and go to the directory where our project lives. Once there, we run Sphinx Quick Start to set things up. The first thing Sphinx Quick Start asks is what the root path for the documentation should be. I find that it works well to use a folder called docs for this, so I suggest typing docs here. Sphinx Quick Start will ask several more questions, which we can answer as we like, and then eventually it will ask if we want to enable the AutoDoc plugin. We do. The rest of the questions are not so important for our purposes. Once Sphinx Quick Start is completed, we'll want to run Sphinx API docs to automatically generate Sphinx source files describing our package. Our doc strings are extracted and incorporated into these source files. Next, we need to modify the conf.py file in the docs directory so that the Sphinx tools will be able to find our package while they generate the documentation. That's easily done just by modifying sys.path. Finally, we want to generate the HTML, which we can construct by make HTML from the command line. Sphinx will translate its source files, including the ones automatically generated by Sphinx API doc, into HTML and store the result in the build directory that we specified when we were going through the Sphinx quick starts questions. If we edit our source code and want to update the HTML documentation, we can usually do it simply by running make HTML again. If we've made major changes to the package structure, we'll need to run Sphinx API doc again as well. So, Sphinx can be used as a documentation compiler, which turns our docstring source code into HTML compiled code. That's it for Sphinx and PEP 257.
So docstrings are most useful when they have the right shape, with a short introductory piece on the top line, a blank line, and then more in-depth documentation. Using restructured text allows us to use rich text in our docstrings without excluding people who are using it as a plain text source. And Sphinx can compile our docstrings and separate documentation files into an integrated and cross-referenced HTML document.
In the next video, we're going to look at one more cool advantage that we can get from docstrings by actually executing the examples we included in our documentation and making sure they agree with what the code actually does.